It shows up first in the smallest part of the day, when they got up, and the fact that it usually was not really up to them. In a Roman house, a slave could be awake before anyone important in the household had even opened their eyes. Lamps had to be handled. Doors had to be opened. Water had to be carried. Clothes had to be laid out in the right order for the right person. If baths were being prepared, that started early too. If children needed escorting, somebody had to be ready before the children started dragging their feet. A meal did not simply appear because the household felt hungry. Somebody had been moving for a while already. And because the work started so early, a lot of them slept close to the work, not tucked away in some private room where they could shut a door and disappear. More like in service spaces, corners, passage areas, anywhere that made it easier to be called and easier to hear if someone wanted something. So even sleep sat half inside the job. You did not really settle. You stayed available. That changes how a person moves. They learned to make very little noise with sandals on floors. They learned what kind of face to wear in different rooms. If the master was in a foul mood, you kept your voice low and your answers short. If the mistress wanted speed, you moved fast without looking flustered. If guests were in the house, you had to appear useful without seeming too visible. Even posture got managed. Eyes down in one moment, alert in the next. Speaking only when spoken to in one room, answering quickly in another because slowness looked like reluctance. So when people say a slave belonged to someone, it was not just some legal line sitting in the background. It reached right into ordinary things. When you slept, when you ate tea, whether you sat down, which door you used, how loud your footsteps were allowed to sound. A free person could be tired and decide to move slowly. A slave had to first ask, in effect, whether the room could tolerate tiredness. And then there were the slaves who were trusted with more than carrying trays or opening shutters, which could make things look different for a moment. Some households had educated slaves teaching children their letters, their literature, their rhetoric. Another might be copying documents. Another keeping account tablets. Another carrying messages tied to business deals, rent collection, purchases, debts. In the morning, the same person might be drilling a boy in recitation. Later that day, he might be counting coins or checking records for a master who depended on him not to mix up figures. From the outside, that can start to look almost secure. A skilled slave could look respected. People in the household might rely on him. He might know things other people in the house did not know. He might handle sums of money, larger than anything he could ever claim as his own. He might be the one children spent hours with every day, correcting their speech, hearing their complaints, keeping them on task when their parents had had enough of them. So naturally, people in that position tried to make themselves hard to replace. That was one of the few ways to breathe a little easier. If you were the one who understood the accounts, if the children listened to you, if you remembered how the master wanted his correspondence worded, if you could keep mistakes from reaching him in the first place, then maybe you gave people a reason to keep you where you were. But that did not turn the job into your own. It just meant your usefulness belonged to someone else too. A slave could spend half a day doing work Romans associated with responsibility and still be reminded, very quickly, that responsibility was not the same thing as standing. If money went missing, if a child repeated something embarrassing, if a message arrived late, if a tablet had an error on it, the fact that you had been trusted did not protect you. In some ways, it made the fall sharper. 1 minute, you are handling business. The next minute, you are being shouted at in front of people who yesterday were depending on you. That is part of the trap in it. Skill could improve your place. It could get you better tasks, maybe better food, maybe fewer filthy jobs, maybe less direct roughness in daily handling. It could even put you near the center of the household. But it did not stop your owner from reminding you that the skill, the time, the result, all of it could be treated as his. Money makes this even clearer, because Rome had this awkward arrangement where some slaves could handle cash and build up what looked, at first glance, like personal savings. A slave might receive tips. He might manage a workshop corner. He might be allowed to keep part of a surplus. He might carry on side dealings for the benefit of the household and have some amount set aside. This fund, the peculium, could become the thing he watched most closely in his life. Coins counted and recounted. A little stash, mentally measured against the price of possible freedom. Every small gain suddenly mattered. A broken cup mattered. A missed errand mattered. An angry scene mattered. Anything that could make the owner sweep the whole thing away mattered. So people got careful in a different way. They learned to watch spending. They learned who tipped and who merely talked. They learned how to stretch small privileges without looking greedy. A slave with a peculium might dress just carefully enough to look competent but not prosperous. Too shabby, and you looked useless. Too comfortable, and you reminded your owner that there was something there to seize. And the nasty part is that the money never stopped being tied to the owner. It might sit in the slave's hands. He might know exactly how many coins were in IT. He might quietly calculate how many more months or years before he could ask for release. He might work harder because now there seemed to be a number attached to hope. But the owner could change his mind. He could reclaim it. He could decide the amount for freedom had risen. He could say not yet. He could hit financial trouble and absorb it. He could simply refuse because the slave had become too useful to lose. So even thrift, discipline, and patience sat under another person's mood and convenience. That did something to behavior too. A slave who was saving toward freedom had to perform reliability almost constantly. Not just do the work, but do it in a way that never made the owner feel challenged. If you looked too independent, that could backfire. If you seemed too aware of your own value, that could backfire too. So you had people trying to build a future while acting as though they had no separate future in mind. And even that could be interrupted because the owner did not just control what kind of work a slave did. He could redirect where that work happened. A slave could be hired out. One day you are in one house, used to its sounds, used to who calls from which room, used to who is quick-tempered before breakfast and who only becomes difficult after wine. You know where things are kept. You know when to speak. You know which child lies and which one cries first. You know where scraps can be saved, where water can be drawn fastest, where another slave will whisper a warning before trouble reaches you. Then you are sent somewhere else, because your labor can bring in money there. Now you are in a new household, or shop, or work setting, and all the small instincts have to restart. Who actually has authority here? The owner? The manager? The steward? Which rules are real and which are performed for show? Is it better to stay out of sight or to prove yourself useful quickly? If you speak too confidently, you look insolent. If you hang back too much, you look slow. If the place has its own slave staff, they are already measuring you too, because a newcomer can mean more work for them, less work for them, blame shifting onto them, or blame shifting onto you. And every move carries risk because you have not yet learned the local habits. Maybe in the old house a delayed answer was tolerated if your hands were full. In the new place it is treated as defiance. Maybe in one house leftover food circulated quietly among the staff. In another, touching it before permission is trouble. Maybe in one place you could ask another slave where a tool was kept. In another, asking shows you should have known already. So a hired-out slave had to rebuild caution from scratch. Learn faces. Learn tones. Learn where to stand. Learn who had the habit of blaming downward. Learn who liked a smooth excuse, and who hated excuses. Any little island of routine built in one place could vanish in a day. And that loss was not just about comfort. It could break the small arrangements people depended on. Maybe you had landed a job indoors rather than one with harder physical labor. Maybe you had a cook who slipped you extra food when supplies allowed. Maybe you were near someone you cared about. Maybe you had worked out a quiet way to add a bit to your peculium. Once moved, all of that could disappear without discussion, because none of it had been yours to secure. Then, punishment enters, and you see even more clearly how little had to go wrong for the whole day to tilt. Punishment did not wait for some neat, obvious act of rebellion. A slave could be punished for a broken item, a failed purchase, poor judgment, suspicion, being in the wrong place during someone else's anger, carrying bad news, not preventing a mistake, or simply being attached to a part of the household where something had gone wrong. If money was short, if an errand failed, if a dinner was spoiled, if a garment was damaged, the question was not always who truly caused it. The question could just be who was reachable. That made the atmosphere in a house very watchful. Slaves watched the owner's face when he came in. They watched one another too. Quick warnings passed in side spaces near storage jars near the kitchen fire, in corridors, while carrying laundry, while cleaning lamps. Keep clear of him. Do not mention the account tablets yet. The child has already upset him. The fish was bad. The guest heard something. Wait before asking. Move that before she sees it. And because punishment could spread, not just land neatly on one person, everybody adjusted when tension rose. Voices got softer. Jokes disappeared. People ate faster if they were allowed to eat. Some tried to make themselves scarce. Others rushed to look useful before they could be accused of standing idle. A lower-ranking slave might suddenly become rougher with someone beneath him, because pressure traveled downward in the easiest direction. You can picture a whole household tightening from one mistake. Somebody fumbles a tray, a message goes astray, an account does not match, and now people are carrying themselves differently by evening. Doors handled more carefully. Kitchen talk cut short. Eyes moving to see who has already been summoned. No one wanting to be the next visible body in the room. That same uncertainty reached into family life, because whatever personal ties a slave had were also held inside another person's rights. People still paired off. They still raised children. They still acted like husbands, wives, parents, sons, daughters, because that is what human beings do when they live together long enough. They remembered each other's habits. They kept little routines. One person saving a portion of food for another. A mother checking whether a child had been assigned somewhere too dangerous. A father trying to hear, from scraps of household talk, whether a sale might be coming. People made family out of whatever space they had. But they did it knowing the arrangement could be cut through from above. A legal marriage in the secure sense was not theirs to lean on. Names could be altered. Records of ownership mattered more than the story you told about yourself. A child born in the household did not anchor the family in place. If the owner wanted to sell, settle a debt, reward someone, reorganize labor, or clear out people he considered troublesome, the family could be split, because the owner was not breaking what he was required to treat as independent. He was moving property. So the habits of attachment had a second layer under them. Quiet anticipation of interruption. Parents paid attention to who had been talking with traders. Adults listened for household financial trouble because financial trouble could turn into sale. A skilled slave might try even harder to prove value if he thought it might keep his partner or child nearby. Somebody else might avoid drawing attention to a child who looked sturdy enough to be marketable. Hope and fear were mixed into ordinary care. And then there is the bodily side of it, which does not always need a dramatic scene to show itself. If another person decides where you sleep, when you rise, what work your hands do, where your feet go, whether your back carries loads inside or outside, whether you stay in one house or are sent somewhere else, then your body is already under other management. Even before you get to open violence, the day has been arranged over you. That is why supposed improvement always came with a catch. Better assignment. It can be changed. Trusted position. It can turn to sharper blame. Savings. They can be taken. Family life. It can be broken by sale. Being near the center of the household. That only means you are more tightly woven into someone else's needs. People still looked for room to maneuver. Of course they did. They traded favors. They listened. They stayed useful. They cultivated the more decent overseer, the less cruel mistress, the child who might later speak for them, the fellow slave who knew how to hide a mistake until tempers cooled. They learned timing. Ask in the afternoon, not the morning. Bring the account when he has eaten. Let her see the task already half done. Do not stand too close when bad news is given. If a beating seems likely to fall somewhere, vanish only carefully, because vanishing too obviously can bring it on to you. All of that is survival, but it is survival inside ownership, not outside IT. Even manumission, which looks like the clean break, did not arrive as some purely self-made crossing. A slave might be freed by formal ceremony, by arrangement, by a will, by a master's decision after years of service, by money gathered and accepted. There could be enormous relief in IT. The person was no longer saleable property. He could appear in public differently. He could act under his own legal identity in ways he could not before. But the old owner often did not just vanish from the picture. The freed person commonly took the former master's name. The relationship shifted, but it did not evaporate. Patronage obligations remained. Work opportunities could still run through the former owner. Reputation could still depend on that connection. Protection, introductions, backing, business openings, all of that might still sit with the man who had once owned him. So even freedom could feel like stepping out of one set of hands while still having to keep those hands in view. A newly freed man had to be careful too. Careful not to offend the patron. Careful not to act as though past dependence could simply be ignored. Careful because public standing was fragile, and because the same old household might still contain people he knew, people he cared about, people not yet free. Which means the question never really leaves the room. If your day had once been arranged by someone else, if your labor had once been shifted, rented, or reclaimed by someone else, if your savings had depended on someone else's consent, if your family could be cut apart by someone else's transaction, then even at the edge of freedom, you were still dealing with what that ownership had already shaped, and with who might come to the door tomorrow expecting something further,